Holodeck 3 program is reinstated.
Open sesame!
Commander Klingon vessel. We are energizing transporter beam. Now.
One, engage!
Hello, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck. This is our first official show of the year, first official discussion, and we're doing something new. Today we embark on a new sub-series of the From the Holodeck podcast that will use Star Trek Enterprise as its foundation for discussions. In many ways, Dave, this is going to be very similar to our other editions, such as Lower Decks Edition and Discovery Edition, but we're not going to be beholden to the strict one-to-one mirroring of our previous formats, where each podcast episode covers a single television episode. This approach is going to be different. I want to use our freedom of not having to cover an episode every week as an episode airs. So this is going to be fun for us because some episodes, Dave, may take several installments to fully explore, as was the case with numerous episodes of Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard and even Star Trek Strange New Worlds. But because we're on that weekly episodic coverage, it's really hard to do multiple discussions. We have to consolidate and focus on the immediate of what that episode is doing. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use that freedom. We have some latitude to stretch our legs, and we're going to really get into episodes. Now, not every episode is going to warrant 2 or 3 discussions, but if we feel like we need to go deeper, we will go deeper. Perhaps there's something pertaining to strong character development that we want to break down that also conveys something profound about personal choices and or consequences. So rather than quickly moving on, we'll take our time to dissect the episode's intellectual depth and thematic significance. If a thematic thread begins in one episode, but fully crystallizes in a later one, we won't pretend we haven't seen the entire series already. Instead, we're going to analyze the evolution of these ideas across multiple episodes. So if something happens in episode 1 and the connective episode or story arc is continued in, say, season 3 or season 4, well, we may skip over there and not do a complete episode coverage of that particular episode, but we're going to bring those elements into our discussion. Because why pretend we haven't seen what has already been aired for over 20 years? So we're going to analyze the evolution of these ideas across multiple episodes, ultimately ensuring a richer, more comprehensive discussion. So expect deep dives into topics like cosmology, narrative structure, literary influence, philosophical inquiry, socio-political commentary, historical allegory, moral and ethical dilemmas, and the show's place within Star Trek's broader canon. So there's a lot we can do. I'm actually, David, looking really forward to this particular edition because of the amount of freedom we're going to have.
Well, exactly. This is one of the first series that I feel we're going to be doing a true retrospective look at a series instead of actually just reacting to each episode and speculating, oh, this is where they can go, this is where they can do. We have the chance to actually look at the complete project.
Yeah.
And to see the story as a whole. And it actually, this might change a lot of our fans' overall ideas of what was good Star Trek and what was bad Star Trek.
Yeah.
And honestly, that's what has me really excited because ever since we started the show, I've started going back and rewatching a lot of the old series, and a lot of my fan biases from the past have changed because now I can actually see the whole story in total.
That is, yes, David, you're absolutely right. And that's the beautiful thing sometimes about a series that actually is well developed and executed, but because we're in the moment, oftentimes our fan desires and our expectations get in the way. And then, years down the road, you take another look and you're like, okay, I definitely understand what they were doing here, and I'm okay with that. That's fine. That's largely how many people view Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Deep Space Nine was the red-headed stepchild of Star Trek for a very, very long time. Now Discovery has taken that title.
And I guarantee you, man, 10 years from now, Discovery will go through the same thing.
Yeah, and you know what, David? I'm going to say something that's going to piss off a lot of people, but I've been doing a lot of deep research and study into Star Trek Discovery, and I hate to break it to people, Star Trek Discovery is probably the most Star Trek of all Star Treks. And I know a lot of people are throwing their hands up in the air and screaming and yelling.
They're banging on the gates.
Sometimes you got to dig deep and see what is actually at work before you shrug or you give people the middle finger. I'm not going to say Discovery is executed 100% well, but that doesn't mean it's not Star Trek at its core.
Yeah.
So anyways, bringing it back to Enterprise, oftentimes with Enterprise, what makes this series, I don't want to say it's unique in that it tackles specific aspects of like humanity's place in the cosmos, because that is Star Trek in general. But this particular episode, or I should say series, Enterprise, really did zero in on that, because this show was designed to be the series that followed the initial steps of the human species jumping into deep space travel.
Yeah.
That is what makes this show unique, because then you have these clashes between idealism and pragmatism and the foundational struggles that would eventually shape the Federation. And we intend to explore these ideas with the depth that they deserve. And again, that's where the latitude comes in that we have when we're going to be covering these episodes, because again, we don't have that weekly schedule that we have to adhere to. We're not going to be rushed.
Yeah.
Which is going to be the best part about these discussions. So
and we won't have to actually go through some of what hangs us up is all the speculation too.
Yes. I'm actually looking forward to moving past that, because the speculation, sometimes we go down that rabbit hole of speculation. We start writing our own episodes. Yeah,
exactly.
It happens. So in this particular episode, to set the stage, we're going to discuss our general thoughts on Enterprise, how we view the series more than 20 years after its conclusion, what it got right, what it got wrong, and how its legacy has evolved over time. And we're going to explore its contributions to Star Trek canon, its narrative strengths and weaknesses, and its impact on the franchise as a whole. Okay, so David, my views have changed a lot since this series aired. And anyone who has been along for, I guess, almost 10 years now that we've been doing this show, Jesus.
Oh, you just made me feel old.
I can't believe it's been almost 10 years since we've been doing this show already. But those longtime listeners, they're probably already somewhat familiar with how I've changed my thoughts and feelings with, or I should say, as it pertains to Enterprise. But I'm going to offer a lot of new thoughts and theories and ideas on things that may come as a surprise to certain people as we progress through these discussions, because I have done, I think in the last 2 years, I've done 3 full rewatches of Enterprise now. And there is just so much you pick up on as you continue to watch, especially when you watch in a fluid fashion, for example, meaning binge watching. Mm-hmm. You start to see some of those themes and some of those deeper aspects, philosophical aspects that may not be as overt until you see things close together in a binge way. So, Dave, what about you? Now, my thoughts have changed on Enterprise. I have come to appreciate this series way more than when it originally aired back in the early 2000s. But what about you, Dave? How do you feel generally about this series 20 plus years later?
20 plus years later. And for longtime listeners that have listened to us, that do once in a while send me private messages telling me how we're doing on the shows, they always crack up that how I started this show.
Yeah, I know.
Hating Enterprise.
Dude, you hated Deep Space Nine, too.
I hated Deep Space Nine, too, yeah. And it's amazing that throughout time, now that I have gone and rewatched all the Star Trek series again and again over multitudes of times now.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because I've gotten older and I look at things differently. And just like what we said is like, you see the totality of like the whole story instead of actually being stuck in the speculation. Oh, they can go this route or this route. Instead, you're seeing the full story that they were trying to say, and you appreciate it more. and a lot of the things that basically, it's amazing. I'm on my 6th rewatch of Enterprise. And I don't know why, but it's amazing to me that basically we started this show 20 plus years ago.
Wait, we started this show? Wow.
Not that long.
We just went 10 years into the future.
10 years into the future. But like, if we started this show a long time ago, and I remember thinking Archer is the most podunk, naive person in the world.
Yeah.
And in the 6th go-around, I'm like going, actually, that's what a human for the first time going into space would be like.
Yeah.
He's not going to be serious. He's not going to be stoic. You're going to be in awe of actually, oh my God, I'm just leaving Earth now.
Yeah.
Well, and look at the vastness of space.
So, Dave, I have I see your point with Archer. But if I had to pick to the biggest weakness in Enterprise, and this is sad, David, because he's the captain, I feel like the way Scott Bakula chose to play Archer to this day still gets under my skin during those, especially during the first season. Second season, it gets better. Third season is stronger. And finally, he finds what works for him in the fourth season. And that's why sometimes Star Trek needs to be given time to grow, because we've had these discussions before. Every single Star Trek series gets better when moving into the fourth season.
Yeah.
It happened with TNG. It happened with Deep Space Nine. It happened with Voyager. I would even argue it happened with Discovery.
Yes.
Look at Star Trek Picard, also improved in his third season.
Final season.
It takes time often for the showrunners to notice what is working and what's not. And when you it becomes a little harder to do those types of things in this new era, because there's even less patience as there was in years past to let a show find its audience and find its feet. But that is pretty much the story of Star Trek. It takes a couple years for it to really find itself. And Enterprise does manage to fix itself, but it was too late.
It was too late.
And to this day, this is the only series that has ever been actually canceled.
Yeah.
Enterprise was not or I should say Discovery was not canceled.
No, it was not. It was chosen not to be renewed.
Right. It ran its 5 seasons and it came to an end. It wasn't abruptly canceled because of, XY reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, Enterprise was a struggle bus. And there are things when you look back at Enterprise that does not age well. I want to say Enterprise has some of the most cringe aspects pertaining to T'Pol specifically. There wasn't a season that went by where they didn't make this bizarre episode that brought attention to her beauty.
Oh, come on.
And it just made
the shower scenes.
Okay, that's bizarre. But then there was an episode I was just watching the other day. I think it's called The Crossing Over. And it's in its 2nd season. And it's about these non-corporeal beings that want to take over the Enterprise crew because they have never, or it's been millennia, centuries since they had a human or a corporeal body.
Yes.
They had evolved to a point where now they were non-corporeal entities, and they had forgotten what it felt like to manifest or possess a body, a physical body. So they possessed the Enterprise crew, and the first thing one of these creatures do is say, "Are you a female?" They say this to T'Pol. "Are you a female? You realize you're the most attractive female on this entire vessel." Like, are the writers letting their own opinions seep through? Hell yeah, I'm going to make sure Jolene Blaylock knows I think she's hot. Hey, Jolene Blaylock, I wrote this episode.
This is for you.
There are moments that just don't age well, and you can point to numerous episodes of Star Trek that have other series that have similar things. There's a few episodes in TNG that kind of didn't age well.
Oh, the original series. Just
the
like
original series. Yeah, the original series. But there's almost a creep factor to how they objectified T'Pol at times. And that's probably, to this day, the thing that's aged the worst. And I hate to use the word objectified in a world where everyone uses that word to describe anytime you look at a woman or appreciate a woman if you're a man.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to argue that's not what they did at times.
Well, here's the thing with that, because I've actually read many articles about that.
Yeah.
And how everyone complains about the sexuality in Star Trek. The difference in like the sexuality of Star Trek when Enterprise happened, because everyone points at Enterprise and goes, Jesus, they went overboard.
It was ratings.
And the whole difference when it comes down to it is subtlety. Like Voyager, TNG, and even the original series, there was subtlety done in trying to express sexuality. Enterprise did not do any subtlety.
You're talking about like sexual
innuendos,
yeah.
And just like what you said is like the way they wrote their scripts and their stories just did not leave any room for nuance.
Yeah, but I will say, Dave, that even though those things were negatives, and unfortunately they kind of stain the Enterprise, but I think most of us understand it's a product of its time.
It's a product of its time,
so
yeah.
That's not me casting judgment or casting stones at the writers by any means. I understand it's a product of its time. It's also a product of ratings is all that matters. Mm-hmm. And they were trying hard to get ratings, so they did the old tried and true method of showing some boobs.
Yeah.
And it didn't work, obviously. But I will say, David, the reason why I even bring this up, because for me, the absolute, and I say this with 100% confidence, the best part of Enterprise, in my opinion, is T'Pol. And not because of the reasons people think. It's the fact, it's not just T'Pol. It's T'Pol and what she does for the audience and our views of early Vulcan society. They had a superiority complex that some might even consider a form of white supremacy, if you want to go with that allegory. There was a sense of prejudice aimed at other people. Now, I never got angry about that like some did. Like, they didn't like how they characterized Vulcan civilization, but it wasn't all of Vulcan civilization. The point was that it was the government at that time. They were oppressive. They were trying to control what people could and couldn't do, which was an interesting socio-political commentary in a lot of ways. But that whole Vulcan recontextualization for the audience is what really saved Enterprise for me. To see how the Vulcan culture changed and actually improved by working alongside humanity and the eventual Federation, of course. So that's always been the strength for me, was T'Pol and the way they used her as a vessel to explore Vulcan ideology, Vulcan philosophy, the Vulcan way of life. And to this day, Dave, that is just something that I always appreciate, because there hasn't been a series or movie since.
Yeah, I can't.
Since Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, that actually delved into Vulcan mysticism, Vulcan culture in a very nuanced way.
Yeah, if you think about it, even like by today's standards, when you get to Discovery, they kind of try to go there.
Yeah, they bring up the Vulcan, the logic extremists.
Logic extremists.
Yeah.
And they tried to go that route, but the difference between Discovery and Enterprise was willing to go full hog onto it.
Yeah.
And I think
full hog or full bore?
Full bore.
Yeah.
Full bore onto it.
We can say hog if you want. We can change it. We can change it.
But like that's the thing about like Enterprise that I actually pulled out of rewatching it is Enterprise like perfect? No, it's not perfect. But the way the ideas that creative group at UPN at the time that was in charge of Enterprise,
UPN,
they actually went to areas that I think by today's standards, people in Paramount would be afraid to go.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like some of the early, because like you're dealing with such a dark period in Star Trek lore history where it's the building of the Federation. Everyone understands that basically in order to get to Utopia, you got to break a few eggs.
Yeah.
Same thing with all the other species. The Vulcans had to start from somewhere to become this perfect logical race.
Yeah.
And some of the articles that I've read about Enterprise, many of the writers were like going, we wanted to do things that people were afraid to do. Because technically that's what Gene Roddenberry would want to do.
They had the benefit of coming out. This is very poorly worded because it sounds very insensitive. They managed to latch on to the political climate in a way that other Star Trek episodes, or Star Trek series, except maybe Discovery, were further removed. So the original series, yes, was working in tandem with the civil rights era. Enterprise dealt with post 9/11 politics. And that's why the show was controversial. Many of the episodes were designed to delve into those specific political topics and discussions that were going on during that time, dealing with the Twin Towers, the terrorist attack, the aftermath of that. I mean, that's what all of season 3 was pretty much an allegory for, the Xindi War.
Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest thing too, is like when you even think about the Xindi War, or even like in some of the series, when they get to the eugenics war, the beginning of the eugenics war, you're dealing with a lot of taboo issues.
It wasn't the beginning of the beginning. You're talking about. Are you talking about when they introduced? What's that guy's name?
The Soong,
yeah, the other Soong. I forgot his
grandfather of Data.
Yeah, and he had basically adopted the augments.
The augments, basically the people who later would be tied to Khan,
right? Or at least they were a part of that group. Because if I remember correctly, Dave, in those episodes, which were a string of 3 episodes or 4 episodes, it was a great arc, right?
Oh yeah, it was.
That's going to be a fun one to cover.
Especially, it has one of my favorite endings. Especially when Archer has to deal with the moral choices that he has to do in that one.
Yeah.
And then in the very end, he has that monologue or that dialogue between him and Soong in the very end, and it ends in this most very unlike Star Trek hopeful point, even though it's hinting at one of the most popular characters in all of Star Trek.
Well, that's what was so cool, because towards the end of that story arc, they brought up Khan, but they referred to him as a almost like not a mystery, but as a legend, something that might not even exist. Oh, have you heard of Khan? No, that's just a story. He wasn't real.
Oh, not even Khan. Also, not even Khan, because remember, when we go back, listen to Soong's statement when he talks about going from the study of genetics to the study of cybernetics.
Yes,
and it's like, oh my God, way he talks about the cybernetics is like, it changes the way you look at Data.
I love the Soong storyline. The only Soong that you could ever point to and say was absolutely evil was the one that was introduced in Star Trek Picard. The one that the one that doesn't matter.
That doesn't matter. Oh my God, yeah.
The one that's my
brother.
That's my biggest problem with Picard season 2. Well, there's other problems, but overall I enjoyed that season. But I didn't like what they did to the Soong legacy because Soong was always that stereotypical mad scientist. Typically, like all mad scientists, they're on the edge of ethics. Like, well, if I cross over just a tiny bit, then this is going to be wrong.
Yeah.
But that's what made the Soong legacy so interesting because all of them were like that. The only one that was straight up bad and just crossed that ethical line completely was the one from Picard. I think his name was Adam Soong.
Yeah.
Which is even a stupid name. Adam. Really?
But that was the thing about like the Soongs too, was like you have this lineage of like all these, like what you said, this mad scientist. And I liked how in Enterprise you got to see almost like a dark reflection of Data's father. Because when you get introduced to Data's father, it's more like a mad scientist who's also an artist who looks at the beauty of life, right? Mm-hmm. The reason why he creates Data is because he is chasing legacy. He's chasing the beauty of life.
That's exactly right, yeah.
And you look at basically his grandfather, and his grandfather is like, oh, screw beauty. I just want to see if it works.
Yeah.
And he doesn't care if people suffer because of his scientific research.
You're talking about the one from Adam Soong?
Not Adam, but basically from Eric. The one that basically
from
was an Enterprise.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's what worked for Eric Soong, because even though he was willing to go down that darker path in Enterprise, he also pulled back. He still held on to his humanity. That's why he ended up turning against the augment children that were actually, he viewed them as children, but that shows you his strong ethics and his strong sense of morality, because even though he loved these augments as his own children, he knew when they were going too far.
Yeah.
And he was the one responsible for ending up capturing them and ending their entire diabolical run. And the reason why that worked for me is because it showed that you have this guy who's searching for something. That's the connective theme between all of them. Even the Adam Soong character from Picard season 2, who I guess you can point to as is the earliest version now at this point of Soong, because he was our century, 21st century. So the main connective theme of that character is what? It's not just about creating life, it's about creating a legacy, but also, except for maybe Adam Soong, it's also about finding a connection.
Yeah.
We know that for sure with Dr. Noonien Soong. Why did they create Data? Yes, it was about legacy, but it was also because they couldn't have children. At least that's what they alluded to, and of course that changed when homeboy showrunner for Picard season 1 just threw that completely out the window.
I forgot that Data's brother, lost
Alton.
brother. Alton.
Yeah. Alton Inigo Soong just got pulled out of the showrunner's asshole. It made no sense, because the whole reason why they made Data was because it was very much implied that they couldn't have children.
And remember,
the Soong parents.
He was a scientist that believed in the power of imagination.
Oh, please, let's not go down there. All right, so let's bring it back to Enterprise more formally here. So when developing Star Trek Enterprise, the producers, if you can't tell already by this discussion and actually watching the series, the producers aim to set the series apart from the previous iterations of Star Trek by embracing a different tone and format. And I think history has shown that wasn't probably the greatest call. Rather than adhering strictly to the traditional episodic structure of The Next Generation or even Voyager, they sought to tell a more grounded, serialized story that reflected the uncertainty and challenges of humanity's earliest steps into deep space. Now, that also didn't happen. That format change didn't actually happen until... Now, the tone, yes, happened immediately, but the format change didn't really happen until the ratings were really fallen, and they decided to go back to the original change that actually happened with Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine was the Star Trek series that went from episodic to more of a hybrid episodic, meaning a cross between episodic and serial. So you'd have various story arcs that would that would be left open-ended, and then basically a myth arc. Think X-Files. Think Supernatural.
Yeah.
That's what Enterprise and Deep Space Nine started to do. And Voyager also messed around with that quite a bit, but Deep Space Nine and Enterprise really took that baton and ran with it. I feel like it did work because in a lot of ways, that's what really improved the third season, was having a more cohesive, serialized story that made you want to watch the next episode and not miss, because you needed that continuation. You needed to see what was going to happen with that Xindi war. So that was an aspect that they probably should have just went with immediately. It worked for Deep Space Nine. It worked for large swaths of Voyager. It didn't really make sense for them to revert back to an old format, but they did quickly learn the error of their ways, and they changed it. And then the other thing was the theme song, which I would definitely say that it gets under the skin of a lot of Star Trek fans in years past. Now, because it's been such a mainstay, I think a lot of us
have grown to love it.
Have grown to love it out of hatred.
Yeah.
It also defies like reasoning. Why would you go from the go-to? I'm asking a question I already know the answer to.
Yeah.
And I'll answer in a second. But this hypothetical question, or this rhetorical question, why would you do that? Why would you go from something that worked in every single series of Star Trek? It was known for its intros. It was known for its expertly scored themes. And then you go to a soft rock track that feels so, even to this day, David, the moment it turns on, I immediately feel like I'm in the late 90s, early 2000s, yes. And I'm forced to listen to that classic rock bullshit channel on the FM dial. It's not good. However, we have grown accustomed to it, right, Dave?
It has.
And we kind of like it now.
Oh yeah, it's got this weird, it's starting to grow like that nostalgia hit. Because like at the time, I honestly think the theme song was created because much like anything in TV, they try to follow trends.
Yeah.
And when you look at Enterprise, it was stuck in the middle of the Dawson's Creek, Friends type of
hokey theme songs.
It's
that classic weird rock.
90s.
Yes.
Yeah. And
it's elevator rock. It's elevator rock music.
Yes. And that's the thing that you would expect during that time frame.
It's Muzak.
Even though
remember Muzak?
Yeah, even though it's like a short time frame, because like that was like probably the 1990s to 2000.
Yeah.
And you had to get like these little jingles in where I guess what they felt was like, this is what mass audiences are feeling. They're trying to pull in people that are not the normal Star Trek fans. They want to bring in maybe like a female demographic,
or just new audiences.
New audiences, yeah. And they see the success of other shows that do not fit Star Trek, and they say, you know what, let's try to bring that over.
Their entire plan and strategy to create this new series that was incredibly different and totally new, it backfired. And I would argue it's the reason why the show eventually got canceled. Not because Star Trek had run its course and it had, at that point, it was 15, 16 years in this new era, in the second phase, I guess you can call it, of Star Trek. It was at the tail end of the TNG era. And I'm not talking about diegetic era. I'm talking about non-diegetic era. I'm talking about going from 86, when I believe TNG originally aired, until 2001, I believe is the year that Enterprise aired. That was the tail end of that era, when Rick Berman and Michael Piller and all of those guys were no longer going to be a part of the series afterwards.
Yeah, the old guard was going to be changing.
And that's what I think their desire to change the entire style and tone of the series is what backfired, and they shot themselves in the foot. Because if you remember, David, they have only retrospectively put Star Trek back into the title.
Yes.
It wasn't even called Star Trek. It was called Enterprise. That's it. It was called Enterprise, and they ran away from their classic Enterprise, or I should say Star Trek theme / intro. And people didn't even, I remember, David, because I'm old, setting my VCR. Yeah, that's right. Setting my VCR to record the pilot episode of Enterprise. And as I'm looking through the TV guide, yeah, that's a thing, I'm looking for Star Trek. I couldn't find it. What time does it start? And I went through for 30 minutes. I'm like, why? Because I was looking for the key words Star Trek. Finally, I realized it was called Enterprise. And I just shrugged. I'm like, okay, it's Enterprise, whatever. Then when I come home from work to watch the pilot, there's no Star Trek in the intro.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, what is happening? And it confused almost every Star Trek fan. Why are they doing this? And I want to say moving into the second year, it could have been the third year, they attached Star Trek to the name.
Yeah. And if you think about it, it was like this, it almost toward the end, it was begrudgingly they had to bring back some of the Star Trek, that what they felt they had to reconnect Enterprise to Star Trek. That's why we got that last episode, because they were like going, oh, we need to reconnect Enterprise, so we're going to bring back some old actors from TNG.
Yeah.
And that's how you get These Are the Voyages, which is one of honestly, every Star Trek fan has stated is like one of the most hated episodes of Star Trek.
Yeah. Yep.
Because it was so obvious that at the end of it, they just begrudgingly said, yes, we are Star Trek. We had to actually reconnect to the IP that we ran away from.
They ran away from. Who does that?
And if you think about it,
David, can you imagine, like, who came up with that idea?
Yeah. If you think about it right now, Mike, think about it now. They're so confused by Enterprise.
Maybe Star Wars should do that. Maybe it'll save it.
Just save it. But they're so confused by Enterprise and where it fits now. Remember I think it was like not that long ago when we got to actually see the Star Trek Day. Me and you were actually reviewed that whole debacle, and they bring up Enterprise. They don't play the actual theme. What do they play? They play Archer's theme.
Yeah, which is a solid Star Trek
which
theme.
is a solid
that
Star Trek
should
theme.
have been the intro.
But it's the ending theme. it's the end theme of the entire show. And again, Star Trek doesn't know what to do with Enterprise, because I'm like, you know what? If you're going to embrace Enterprise, just play the song. Play the song. Everyone will love it, because everyone will shrug and go, yeah, that's Enterprise.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to play the Archer's theme for a second.
Oh,
we might get
theme.
kicked off YouTube, but it's worth it. I want to play it because I will say, even though it's much stronger than the theme, than the intro theme or intro rock tune, this does also have a little bit of that late 90s, early 2000 funk. Right, let me make it. Okay, it just gets out. Okay, here we go. Why the electric guitar?
Why the electric guitar?
It throws off the entire song. It's like, okay, this is a really good beat. There's a build up. We're about to hit the climax. It's still going.
It's still going. Meanwhile, behind
it is a good song, though.
Meanwhile, behind it is a very solid scored orchestra.
Yes.
That's reminiscent of the cinematic Star Trek side of themes.
Yeah. And we're just being nitpicky because it is a great
a
great theme. And to be perfectly fair, you can point to the original series theme and say it's also a product of the 60s. It very much is.
Absolutely. It is.
I mean, even the Star Trek animation theme is even worse, meaning I love it, but that thing has that 70s Disney Michael Jackson Thriller vibe that it feels like you're about to have a party.
Yeah. And that's why I tell people, I actually have faith in the heart on my playlist.
Oh,
I'm like going, it's grown on me. For some strange reason, it's grown on me because of that silly, member berry.
Yeah.
But it is kind of like what you mentioned earlier. It's a member berry that you hate watch. You're like, you.
I mean, listen, dude, there are times when I, have a fake microphone when that theme song comes on and I start singing with it.
It's the same here.
I got faith in the heart.
I got faith in the heart.
What does that even mean? Like, we should break down the lyrics because the lyrics.
Don't break it down because that is the logic of the 90s.
David, the lyrics don't make sense.
Exactly.
Is that a saying to have faith in the heart? Faith in the heart. I mean, yes, I guess. It just sounds awkward.
Think about how it starts, Mike. It's been a long time getting from there to here. And I'm like going, the lyrics itself just basically show you it's a bunch of nothing. That is late 90s music writing. A bunch of jumbled nonsense that's supposed to tug on your heartstrings. Sometimes patriotic heartstrings, sometimes romantic heartstrings, but it's going to tug on your heartstrings to make you want to sing the words.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so it says, I can feel the change in the wind right now. Nothing's in my way.
Exactly. I can feel the change.
And there sounds like a Hallmark card. And they're not going to hold me down no more. No, they're not going to hold me down. Yeah, who's holding you down? I mean, I guess if you're connecting this to Archer, you can say the Vulcans have been holding us back. Yeah. All right, so beyond the intro, the series format itself, some say it broke new ground, because the first two seasons, like we were mentioning, leaned into an episodic structure while also emphasizing the growing pains of the early interstellar diplomacy, which is its strength, in my opinion. That was some of the best parts of Enterprise, was seeing them struggle. Having Archer realize that we can't just show up at the doorstep of a planet and think everything is going to go over well. There are some people in this universe that just don't want you approaching them. They don't. That was the lesson. I love that lesson. That came from DePaul, and that's the strength of DePaul's character, because in a lot of ways, David, the journey to General Order 1, which will later become known as the Prime Directive, the number one guiding principle in Star Trek, DePaul had a big part in shaping that. Now, they never specifically give her credit, but she's the one who she's literally saying things that find its way in the Prime Directive eventually.
Yeah.
Don't interfere with societies that are not ready for you to intervene. You could throw off their natural progression as a species. It can also spell certain doom for certain species who just can't comprehend that alien life exists at this moment in their own culture. Those lessons were some of the best in Enterprise. And to see how those little nuggets, beginning way in I believe even the first episode, they already had acknowledged those types of aspects. But those things were littered. Those breadcrumbs were dropped throughout the first season, the second season, the third season, the fourth season. And I do not believe we actually ever saw, because of its abrupt cancellation, we didn't actually see the construction of General Order 1 officially.
Yeah.
I don't believe. I could be wrong. But we knew what direction that was going in. We understood. If you know the Prime Directive, which if you're watching Star Trek and you know Star Trek, then at some point you had to have heard of the Prime Directive.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that I honestly think if Enterprise was released today and put it alongside Discovery, because part of Discovery's story, too, is the challenging of the Prime Directive. You got to remember, that's part of Saru's beginning story.
Saru?
Yeah.
Discovery. You said Discovery. Yeah.
It's challenging the Prime Directive. Meanwhile, you have Enterprise who's like telling, this is the dangers of challenging the Prime Directive. Mm-hmm. This is looking back at Enterprise, I always thought it was silly how a lot of people said, oh, they're trying to destroy the legacy of the Federation by showing them as the bad guys.
Yeah.
But in actuality, when you really take a step back, it's showing you the importance of stuff like the Prime Directive.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a cornerstone of the Federation.
In a lot of ways, it justifies the creation of the Prime Directive, because that's something which I fucking love the Prime Directive, because it is filled with philosophical oomph. There are there are so many scenarios in Star Trek that make you scratch your head ethically.
Oh, dude.
I don't know if that's right, but the Prime Directive is the law, and you cannot break it. So there are times where, like there's this episode in TNG where Data defied the Prime Directive to save this young girl's life, and Picard was angry with Data. And Picard never gets angry at Data, but he was mad at Data because Data purposely bypassed the Prime Directive because he felt like it was the right thing to do, even though this was a pre-warp society and also a society that knew nothing about extraterrestrial life. This was also their course. This was their natural course. And who are we to play God? That's the whole point of the Prime Directive, to let societies find their footing, to develop on their own. And that was a way in the old days, meaning in the 60s, it was basically an idea that would combat imperialism because you're dealing with a spaceship. Let's just look at this from a social Marxist standpoint, which was very big in the 60s and 70s and died out in the 80s and 90s and has had a huge resurgence over the last 5 or 6 years. There were discussions, even as far back as the 1960s, dealing with the alleged liberal mission of the United Federation of Planets. But this is basically colonialism.
Yeah.
That's how it was described by people. I don't agree with that, but that was the conversation. So in a lot of ways, the Prime Directive was the bumper. It was like, no, we're not colonizing. We're not forcing our will on anyone. In fact, this law here guarantees that we will never become an imperial ship.
Yes, because that becoming an imperial ship goes against everything that the Federation stands for.
Yeah.
You know, the Federation's supposed to be a conglomeration of different species and different cultures that all get together and peacefully coexist.
Yeah.
It's not, you know,
for the betterment of the galaxy.
For the betterment of the galaxy.
And for the species themselves.
It is not, you know, like blending cultures. It's actually to coexist together.
Yeah, it's not an assimilation effort.
It's not an assimilation.
Yeah.
So, like, that's the thing that I find really interesting nowadays when, especially going through the rewatches of Enterprise and then looking at how new Star Trek kind of views it and seeing, like, how the fan bases actually look at it and feel like there's a lot of fans out there that hate the Prime Directive now.
I love it.
Because, like, to them, they feel the Prime Directive is unfair.
Yeah, it's because we have, David, a bunch of people that have decided to subscribe to a weird, like, virtue ethic.
And
this virtue ethic is not real virtue ethics, which is a whole other field of ethics. It's a streamlined, stripped down of any critical thought, and it's, well, the good thing to do.
There you go.
Well, what is the good thing to do? Because the good thing to do is incredibly subjective.
Mm-hmm.
The good thing to do to you or for you is going to be incredibly and entirely different for someone else. That's the whole point of the Prime Directive. So people who argue that it's a meanie-bo-beanie law that prevents the Federation from helping people, they don't even understand the entire philosophical foundation of Star Trek.
Exactly.
They should probably just stop watching.
And that is one of the biggest points that I pulled out of rewatching Enterprise is kind of like the things that basically bothered me when I was younger. I stop and I think about them and go, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, this kind of makes sense. Because going back to like what you said, you don't want the Federation's not supposed to be an imperialistic society. That's the Terran Empire.
Yes. Yeah. There's an episode, David, that we're going to have fun discussing and analyzing. I want to say it's during its first season, Enterprise. During Enterprise's first season. Do you remember the episode where they met a alien species and there were two species in one planet? So there was the primary species and then there was a subspecies, as they called them. And the primary species was dying of an unknown disease. There was something, I don't remember the nuances of it, but it was like some type of genetic disorder and their bodies were breaking down. And Archer had offered to help them. And through the course of this episode, the doctor who was tasked to help these people find a cure, while looking for this cure, discovered that there is no cure. and that they're dying naturally, that this is the end of their species.
Yeah.
And for them to interfere would mean that the subspecies would not inherit the Earth, because the subspecies, he did studies on them. They were getting more intelligent.
They were evolving.
So he said this is the natural progression of this planet. The natural progression was for this primary species to die out to make room for the subspecies that would dominate the world and become not the apex predator, but the primary species. So the Doctor told Archer that he doesn't want to do it. He's like, why should we interfere? Do you not understand how serious this is? We're preventing, if we save this species here, the prime species, we are literally playing God, and we're preventing the subspecies from evolving.
Mm-hmm. But
so
again, Mike.
So Archer didn't. It was a powerful episode because it was one of the best episodes for Scott Bakula, because I've had my problems, as I mentioned at the top of the show, with his portrayal of Archer. It's one of the best moments for him as an actor, because you can see how much of a struggle this was for him.
Oh yeah,
and the ultimate message was, David, and this was the most powerful aspect of the episode, is when the Doctor used humanity's past as an example why this would be wrong, because Archer disagreed with the Doctor, and he was going to go forward with giving this primary species a cure that they ended up finding. And this is the ethical dilemma, because they withheld, by the end of the episode, they withheld the cure. And the reason why was because the Doctor told Archer, he said, now I want you to think about this. Before we do this, what if an alien species came and gave the Neanderthals a cure that would make them the dominant species? That's what we're doing.
That's what we're doing.
By doing that, you would have hindered all of humanity's progress and evolution. That's what we're doing here, if we give them this cure. And then you see that realization set in Archer's eyes. He gets it.
Yeah.
And then the episode ends in this very morbid, sad way, but it's a powerful episode. And an episode like that is Star Trek at its best.
Yeah.
That is the epitome of Star Trek.
Because it's supposed to do what Gene Roddenberry always says Star Trek should do. It should create discussion.
Yep.
Don't show just one side. You have to create discussion between everybody that is amicable.
Yeah.
It's no one's arguing with each other. Everyone's posing their own sides so that they can understand each other. Again, going back to like what me and you have always stated about like the strength of a Star Trek series is its main focus is about communication. It's communication among species, among characters.
Yes, that is one of the, I guess I won't say foundations, but that is one of the main aspects of Star Trek from Roddenberry's own mouth, that at its core, Star Trek is about miscommunication. So like when you get to the funny part, and this is actually after my last rewatch of Enterprise, I kind of imagine that the character of Archer is supposed to be us Star Trek fans. Yes.
Because when I look at Archer and see how he reacts, I think about all the Star Trek fans out there that I've met through this show and through my time being a Star Trek fan that just looks at the positives of the Federation and the optimism, right? Mm-hmm. And not realizing you have to get, in order to get there, it takes time and it takes work. I'm not going to say that you have to step on people and
sometimes, David, it's a long road getting from there to here.
Aha!
It's been a long time.
See, and that's
but
why
the time is finally near.
And see, the song now makes sense now, doesn't it?
Oh man, yeah, I get your point, David. You are 100% correct about the view of optimism. A lot of people do get confused with Star Trek's intent. People believe that Roddenberry's view on Star Trek was absolute, meaning there's no room for recontextualizing certain aspects, and that was not the case. Roddenberry only set a few things in motion that needed to be permanence.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about the crew working together, meaning a functional crew getting along, because he wanted to portray humanity as being in harmony with each other. And, of course, optimism. But the thing is that you can't just have this hokey, optimistic world. This is why I do like Discovery, because Discovery literally went into the past to form a discussion around the zeitgeist of 2017, which had everything to do culturally with the disillusionment with institutions.
Mm-hmm.
So Star Trek Discovery diegetically went into the past, and non-diegetically went into the past to explore the very issues that we are facing, and then created Allegory in Discovery to do so, in order to create a picture of a hopeful future that they then reach by going into the future, into the 32nd century, where they can rebuild the Federation.
Yeah.
It's genius. It is absolute genius. You just have to look for it. And the same thing applies to Enterprise. Enterprise isn't perfect, just like Discovery isn't perfect, but that doesn't mean there isn't genius within these episodes.
Yeah.
All right, this brings us to the end for our first discussion. We did not get into what the potential 5th season was supposed to be.
Oh my God.
Which we're going to get into during a Patreon exclusive discussion, which is probably what we're going to do. We're going to try to get as much as we can into a free discussion, our regular discussion, and then any secondary discussions that we need to get into or stuff that we couldn't fully cover in our allotted time, we'll do so for our Patreon subscribers. And if you want to take part in that, for the Enterprise exclusive discussions, they're only going to be on the $1 tier. Now, if we do any bonus Star Trek discussions that go outside of Enterprise, like we do from time to time, like we're going to be planning, or we have been planning, a discussion on the philosophy of transporters, that will be under the typical podcast tier, the $5 a month tier. But the Enterprise discussions, I'm going to throw on the $1 tier. So head over to patreon.com/RainmanDigital and pledge $1, and you will gain access to our additional Enterprise discussions. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.